Hi everyone. Today we are going to discuss about RTGS and how it operates, and we are going to also see certain FAQs that most of the bank customers have regarding RTGS. So now let's get into the video. First of all, what is RTGS? RTGS stands for Real-Time Gross Settlement System. Now this is simply an electronic fund transfer method. How you transfer funds electronically from one account holder to another. Now what is special in RTGS? There are two key things which are special when it comes to RTGS. The first thing is real time. Yes, here the transfer happens instantaneously. The very moment that you transfer, the credit is received to the counterparty. The next important feature is that this is a gross settlement system. Why is this unique or important in this system? Because most of the fund transfer methods operate on a net settlement basis. That is why they are unable to perform the transaction on real-time basis. Here, transaction happen as a gross settlement basis. What do you mean by gross settlement? Each customer's transaction is handled individually as a separate transaction without bundling all customers' transaction and netting off as once. Might not be clear to you, let me explain you further. Now, let's take, there are two banks, there is bank A and then you have bank B. You have one customer A, who is transferring funds to a customer in bank B. Again, customer is also B, and the transaction value is 5 million. Okay. Similarly, on the very same day, there is another customer in bank B. Let's call this person X. He or she has to transfer funds to a customer named Y in bank A. Now that transaction value is also coincidentally 5 million. Now, if the system is a net settlement system, what happens? Bank A has to pay B 5 million. Again, bank B has to pay bank A 5 million. So why bother transferring it? We'll net it off within the two banks. So effectively, there is no money movement between the banks, just payment confirmation, and they will pass the entry. This is what happens in a net settlement. So for you to do a net settlement, you have to wait until all transactions are received to you, all requests for transactions, and then you have to net off against specific counterparties. Alright? What happens in gross settlement is that each transaction is handled as a separate transaction. Here, transfer from A to B will happen as one separate transaction immediately as the request is made. Similarly, the transfer from B to A will happen separately right after the request is made by the customer X. That's the difference between net settlement and gross settlement. Now, having understood what RTGS is, let's now go through who can do these RTGS transfers. This is a specific payment platform which is given access to only for selected parties. The current participants in the system are, obviously we have central bank, then you have all commercial banks, and another important thing that you need to know is the licensed specialized banks are not given access to this. They are not given access to RTGS. Only one specialized bank is given access, that is National Savings Bank. So if you are going to do a RTGS in any of the licensed saving bank, only National Savings Bank could help you in that. Then all primary dealers are given access to this. Why? Because they transact with the central bank for say, government security purchases and sales. So they have to have RTGS. So they are also allowed to use it. EPF, Employees Provident Fund, because they need to receive money from counterparties and pay out their beneficiaries and also invest in certain instruments as well. So they also given access to RTGS transfers. And finally, the Central Depository System of Colombo Stock Exchange. Why? They are the entity who handles settlement of Colombo Stock Exchange. So they are given access to RTGS to do fund settlements from their part as well. How can a customer use this RTGS system? Now, yes, the banking entities are given access to this system, but how can customer make use of this system? Now, for customer, this system becomes or comes as a handy system when they are going to do high value transaction or if there are any urgent transaction that they need to carry out. Why? The transfer happens on a real time basis. But why are we saying that RTGS is more recommended to customers for high value transaction? This is because there is a transaction cost. And when you go through the transaction cost, I'll explain you further. Given the cost, it's usually beneficial when you execute high value transactions. But how can a customer access the RTGS system? There are two ways. The first way is directly requesting the bank to perform the transaction. So the customer will either request in writing or via email depending on the arrangement they have with the bank, and they could request the bank or their counterparty to make the RTGS transfer on their behalf. This is the most used method currently. A lot of banks receive the request and then thereafter they feed the transaction to the system and effect the transaction. Now, what is upcoming facilitation is that RTGS is facilitated through online banking platforms. So, yes, if you have online banking access, your bank might allow you to do your own RTGS transfer by you yourself feeding the transaction to the system. So in these two ways, customer could access the RTGS and perform their transfers. Next, what kind of transactions are done through RTGS? If you are going to do a transaction through RTGS, these four types of transactions are allowed. The very first one is general credit transfers among participants. Who are the participants? We just saw them. Central Bank of Sri Lanka, licensed commercial banks, then we saw NSB, then we saw all primary dealers, EPF, and then CDS of the Colombo Stock Exchange. So these participants, if they want to do any transfers within themselves, yes, then they could use RTGS. Second, transaction with the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So if you are doing any transaction with CBSL, again, you could use RTGS to make your fund transfer. So for what kind of transactions will you be engaging with the central bank? When you are doing a rupee leg of a forex transaction, when you buy or sell government securities to central bank, when you do any open market operations with the central bank, when you make deposits in the standing deposit facility or make any lending withdrawals through the lending facility, for all those you will be directly transacting with the central bank itself. So again, for those kind of transactions, RTGS can be used. Thirdly, multilateral net settlement balances sent by Lanka Clear in respect of interbank check clearing, Sri Lanka interbank payment system, common ATM switch, common electronic fund transfer switch, common point of sale switch for final settlement. Now don't get confused saying this is a very huge thing to remember. I'll make it simple. Now remember, in the very first slide, we understood what net settlement is. Now here when we went through the example, both the transaction had the same value. Now let me amend it and make one transaction 8 million and the other will remain at 5 million. Now how will the net settlement work? Bank A has to pay Bank B 8 million. B in turn has to pay only 5 million to Bank A. So here on net settlement what happened? Not 0. Now it's going to be 3 million. So effectively by day end, 3 million must be sent from Bank A to B. This is the final settlement from this particular set of transactions. Let's say all these net settlements were slips. So when you net off all the slip requests at the end, finally you only have to pay 3 million to Bank B. So how do you pay this 3 million? This 3 million to Bank B can be done through RTGS transfers. That's what they are mentioning as the third requirement or the type of transaction allowed to do through RTGS platform. So here when you do net settlements through slips, through check clearing, through common ATM switch, common electronic fund transfer switch in any case, and then point of sale related switch, for all those the final settlement can be done through RTGS transfer system. Final fourth one, any other high value time critical payments presented by the participants on behalf of customers. Yes, customer related transactions which are high value time critical can also be done through this RTGS transfer. So this is what the customer sees. So only this part is known to the customer. Customers are unaware that these type of transactions are also done through RTGS transfers. Next, what are the RTGS cutoff time? Is it a 24/7 payment transfer system? No. This has a timing. It only works maximum until 4:30. It opens maybe at 8 to 4:30 is the cutoff time, which is the maximum. But there are two cutoff times depending on the nature of the transaction. They allow you to do transaction until 3 p.m. for customer related transfers. Only for customer related transfers, maximum account to account transfers can be done until 3 p.m. on all banking business days. So here understand that any customer transfers has to be done by 3 but on all banking related business days. Now you can also do transfers until 4:30, but what kind of transfers? It has to be interbank transfers. Any transfers within the participants itself, then until 4:30 you're allowed to do your transaction. But what's the key thing here? This can be done on all working days. It doesn't necessarily have to be a banking day. For example, let's say it's a working day but not a banking day. Let's say it's for a holiday for bankers but all others are working. Still, yes, RTGS, let's say it's an interbank related transaction. The bank is allowed to do such a transfer. Next, is there any transaction limit for RTGS transactions? Now, in Sri Lanka, our central bank has not imposed any maximum or minimum value limit to RTGS transfers. But if you take most countries, usually they have at least a minimum value limit. Why? They don't want to facilitate smaller transaction through such a platform. Then the load in the platform will be higher. For example, India has a minimum limit of 200,000 to RTGS. So anything above Indian rupee 200,000 can be done through the RTGS platform. But in Sri Lanka, no, there is no minimum value as such. But Certain banks do impose a minimum value which is about 5 million so that they could reduce unnecessary RTGS requests for much smaller amounts. Sometimes even customers don't make such requests for smaller value transfers. Why? There is a cost involved and usually that cost is higher than the other transfer system. So what is this cost amount? How much does a customer have to pay to do RTGS transfer? They have to pay 400 rupee with taxes. So 400 plus taxes is the maximum fee that a bank can charge. So customers, be aware. Earlier it used to be 1000 plus taxes. Now they have reduced it to 400 plus taxes. Finally, how quickly will you receive money? Yes, though this system says it's done on real time, what actually happens is quite different. Now, in the morning, customer will make the request of RTGS transfer to the bank. Then what will the bank do? Bank will check for balances, whether there is adequate funds to do the transaction and inform treasury. Look here, there is a transaction as such. Then what will the treasury do? The treasury back office will send out a swift message. They will send out a swift message to the receiving bank. They will say, look here, there is a transaction of such and we are paying you so and so this amount. So this swift acts as nearly the payment confirmation. Why? They confirm that look here, there is a payment coming your way. And by evening, now remember the cutoff time for customer related transactions were 3 p.m. So by 3 p.m. or immediately after 3 p.m. so for certain transaction. So if you make the transfer at around let's say 3 itself, by 3:15, 3:30, all the credits will be recorded in the relevant receiving banks. Why? They would have received the funds and then the bank has to credit the funds to directly the account itself. That's how the RTGS works. So though you say real time, it not be happening instantaneously as how SEFT would work. I will explain you how SEFT would work in another video, but this is not so real time as SEFT itself. There is another way that you could do your transactions through RTGS. You could make future dated transaction. You're not going to make the transaction today, but you need to do a future dated transaction. Then also you could use RTGS, but the catch point is that they allow you to do future dated transaction as long as the transaction date or the value date is within 10 days in advance. Let's say you're making a transfer request today to the bank where the value date is within 10 calendar days from today, then yes, they could submit this request to the RTGS. But if it exceeds, no, it cannot be done via RTGS platform. So with that, I hope you got a clear understanding of how RTGS works. We'll meet again in an interesting series of banking related videos. Thank you so much for listening in. Subscribe to Learning Business for more videos.